Wolfcock Ramirez, doing another pointless episode of Old School Horror Paperbacks. We're going to do something a little bit different on this one. I'm going to be soon to introduce my blood vomit sorceress, that is Miss Slit Ramirez, for the first time onto the camera, and talking about some of the books that we've actually read together, and wanting to hear her opinion as well, and seeing whoever gives a shit actually thinks the same. Yeah, so, but first of all, I'm going to break the ice and just start with a book that I read quite recently, which is a epic hitter in the underground. It's called, Edward Jarvis, Maggots. Also the author of a book called Pestilence. Not just because it says it on the cover, but yeah, he's really good with the pest-orientated horror stories. This one here, I mean, look at this cover. This is a, actually, hang on, let me tell you. I like to talk about the book companies. Yeah, it's Arrow. Sorry, Arrow Books. It's another one. Like, you've got New English Library and Hamlin and things like that. They're all the winning trails that you want to go on for good, I guess, B grade shit. Yeah, so Maggots, you're going to look at it and you're going to think, oh man, it's just another one of them mundane, you can predict what's going on from beginning to end kind of stories. But this is actually really cool. And also, it took me back to school as well, talking about, well, first of all, let's say the characters involved. You've got a science teacher, a US senator who's just a hothead cowboy motherfucker. You've got a speleologist, who the speleologist is if for anybody who doesn't know, is a cave expert, basically. And who else you got? You also got an expert on insects. So all these people eventually come in together to fight or to eradicate what is the mass of maggots that are actually coming from the subterranean dwellings. Like I was saying before, you'd think this was just a really mundane story where you can predict everything that's going on. It's just absolute garbage. But no, it takes you back to school. It talks about, this, like Edward Jarvis. He's very clued up as far as speleology goes. So details as far as caving goes, insects, science. He talks about the crust, the core, the mantle, all of that, politics, whatever. This book is actually pretty fucking cool. And I'd also say read Pestilence as well. Edward Jarvis, he's the man. I mean, you got to look at this cover if you could see that well enough. As you'll notice, I've got a slightly better camera from the last couple of videos. Not that it really matters or not. But I mean, I'd love to know who the artist was. You see all these maggots coming all over this fucker's face. It's awesome. It's also, though, the way that they defeat the maggots in the end. They try eating them. Typically, they try to bomb them and light them on fire. What else? Poison them. But that is not the outcome of the potential demise of the maggots. It's that holds, pretty much inlays something far greater in itself. The ultimate result of this story is very interesting, and I would recommend reading this book on the horror meter. There are definitely sections where I'd probably give it maybe I don't know, it's only a 5 or something. On the story meter, probably a 6.5, like a good 6.5, if that makes sense. Other than that, I'd like to pose the question now to anybody, and this is where I'd like to bring in Mrs. Ramirez, is that you've got all of these horror stories where you've got, starting with like maggots and scorpions and spiders and snakes, any kind of reptiles or zombies, whatever, ants, fucking the list just goes on and on and on. I mean, what I'd like to ask is, what do you think would be worse? Swarms of locusts or bees, or, hordes of scorpions or arachnid pestilence, such as spiders or, crabs and lobsters, or maggots. What do you reckon? I'm going to bring in Mrs. Slit Ramirez right now, and we're going to carry on from there.
Hi.
Here she is, Miss Slit Ramirez. Say hello. My goddess of the damned. By the way, you've been drinking tonight?
Maybe.
I've been drinking rum for not rum. Fuck me in the ass. Port. Thank you. Been drinking port for the last 2 hours. Feeling a little bit loose. Yeah. Anyways, you read a section of maggots with me.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. What would your basic, would you say hypothesis be? Prognosis?
I think
diagnosis.
I think maggots would be more irritating than something so like wasps. I had a nightmare about wasps once, and so I hid under the rugs, and it was very hot, and I couldn't breathe much, and so it's like heat and suffocation versus stinging wasps. So that might have to be the call from me.
That's good. That's real good. Actually taking it to another level. I don't know. I had one of those summer nights where you wake up and there's fucking mosquitoes, and it's so hot and you're trying to stay under your sheets, but the moment you come out of your sheets, there's a window open somewhere and there's mosquitoes all through the room.
Mosquitoes could be a slow death, swollen and itchy from multiple bites and feverish from transferred diseases.
Scratching those scabs.
Yes.
What fun. Anyways, Edward Jarvis maggots. Thank you, Slit Ramirez.
You're welcome.
Wow. This is fun having somebody else on camera. All right. Maggots, recommended. Buy it. Fuck it. Whatever. Edward Jarvis. Right, moving on. So we're going to talk about a couple of books that we've read together. And actually, in this video, this is very important right now. If you're one of those cunts who just wants to watch a video for 2 minutes and then piss off, please, I want to talk right now about one of the books we will be showing is actually my most treasured paperback, the most money I've ever spent on a book, and a book that I hold on a fucking pedestal, and I'd like people to stick around if you care, whoever 10 or 15 people ever watch this video, I'd like you to know about this. Miss Ramirez, she read it first, and then I said, well, fuck it, I'm going to have to read it, but that's going to come later. Most treasured paperback coming to you soon. But first, mainstream alert. Hey.
Yeah.
Mainstream alert. We read this book together, and it took us a long time. There was a lot of fucking almost strenuous effort put into this book.
Yeah.
But and this would probably be no news to anybody really, but fuck it. We got The Shining by Stephen King.
You.
Yay, Mr. Stephen King. Everybody sits there and they say, when you go, oh, I like reading books, people say, oh, have you ever read Stephen King? But we're going there this time. We got The Shining. We read the book. We got through it. We watched the film as well, just to compare to the book. And I would like to say you did the majority of the reading. And I'd like to say, in the overall story, what was your verdict looking at this specific Stephen King tale?
I really like The Shining. I know that it's a classic and very popular movie, and there's a lot of parts of the movie that turn up a lot in pop culture, and I did enjoy it. But I preferred the book because there was a lot more character development, which I felt really enhanced the plot and how frightening some things were. Yeah, I really liked to, especially the character of Jack was fleshed out a lot more, which made him seem even more insane as opposed to just bad and dodgy from the beginning.
Absolutely. Well, that's where you're going to get. You get so much more depth out of the story itself than you will when they have to chop it into an hour-long film.
There was a lot of bits that were too long-winded for me personally, but you really feel driven to read it because you want to know what happens. And yes, there's certainly creepy bits.
Creepy bits. So
what do you think?
Well, what I thought, and the first thing that comes to mind, and I remember us speaking about it when we read the book, was how they actually really, really focus on the house itself being an evil entity, where that is almost devoid in the film.
Yeah.
You know, and that, I think, was almost imperative to the story in one form or another, to actually show that the house, or the chateau, was a living, breathing thing in itself.
Yeah.
What about the endings? The endings, like, without giving anything away, like, not that anybody hasn't seen or read The Shining anyway, but like the ending from the book to the film. What do you reckon?
I think both endings were actually good and satisfactory. Well, just how the young child was hallucinating. What was his name? He was hallucinating throughout the entire book, and you can really feel this ending building, and you really wanted to see what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. But how is it how, like, the little girls, the two twins, they're a massive part of the film, but in the story, it's a different case.
They are in there.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh shit! Well,
and they're not as not as prominent as in the movie, but they are in there.
All right. Okay. Anyways, I guess we'll keep moving along, so all our goldfish brains can tick over to the next story. I do thank you for your input on that.
You're welcome.
What would you say? Horror meter.
Oh, it really depends what mind space you're in. I reckon.
For you personally.
3.5 out of 5.
Well, we go out of 10s.
Oh.
So would you say like a 6?
Oh,
or
gosh.
5?
A 6.
A 6. There we go. All right. What about the story in itself? As a whole, it's creatively.
I really liked the story. It was different. It was abstract.
Very abstract.
I don't know. I just have a positive feeling towards this book, despite having to wade through parts that I felt, if you really want to experience just horror, I felt that maybe there's certain parts of the book that are superfluous or could have been skipped over. But
absolutely,
it does help with the character development.
That's right. And that's the price that you pay, though, when you read like a full-length novel.
Like, I think it's probably part of Stephen King probably being like a really like a higher brow writer than you know. I just want like.
You think somebody's going to be like, somebody's going to be stuck at a typewriter for months and months on end, going, you know, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
But it doesn't say that in the book, and
no,
I was annoyed.
And it obviously is not the case for Mr. Stephen King. You know?
I know it does. It says something like that.
Oh.
Gosh, we're confused.
All right, moving on. Well, I'm not even going to give it a rating because, I mean, like, I like the movie and I like the story, but personally, I'd go a Firestarter or Salem's Lot or something like that. Moving on from Stephen King, The Shining, to my most treasured paperback. I'd like to hit this one now, just while we've got any potential audience attention. All right, so this is a big fucking deal. We are looking at, as we can see that, Isabel by Jane Parkhurst. This is a one pressing and one pressing only, as far as I'm aware, book from 1977, I believe. In 77, yep. And I put this book on a pedestal for a long time because you look at this, it looks like a fucking antique relic of a story. Even the back looks cool. And it's only once in a blue moon that you get a paperback that has also got interior imagery. And this book cost me a lot of money. If you could get your hands on it, I'd highly recommend it. It's a tragic story. You read it before me, and that's why, because I had it on a pedestal for so long that I didn't want to read it. I just sat there staring at it. And then you read it that night. Oh, well, fuck it. I better do it too. Pretty well, it's look, Jane Parkhurst. She's a wonderful writer. I don't think she has much else out there, but this is set in Scotland in the 1600s, and it's very old-fashioned and is a very, very dramatic story. Could you give me a brief couple of dollars in the well on this one?
Yeah.
Before we continue?
It was a sad story based on someone's sort of life from history, hence probably why it was a bit sad, because things didn't always go the way that women wanted them to go back then. I
Incredibly
felt
unfortunate.
like I feel like it delivers what you want to hear. Like it could get quite sexual at parts, which is the sort
It
of,
was sexual enough.
like the Satan stuff that you want to like know about. The only issue I had was there was some stuff that I was hoping would happen, sort of revenge sort of stuff. Once Isabel really started to, get into her own.
Yes.
When
Yes.
but there
is
wasn't
practitionism a word?
when she was a practitioner, when she became a witch.
Yeah,
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like basically what happens, because in this like old fashioned is you're a Christian or a Catholic in a small Highland town, and you're going to marry a Catholic, or you're going to marry, or you're not really meant to marry into a Christian family. Isabel and a bloke named Will Bauer, I believe, they fell in love and they were meant to be married, but instead Isabel got sold off by her alcoholic father to a Christian man who was actually just a complete beast of a thing. He was fucking horrible.
And that's when she had to take her life into her own hands.
Absolutely. And sure she did.
Yep, and then once you start down that road, you have to read the book to find out what happens.
You have to read the book to find out, yes. And like we said, we're both in agreement that this is actually a really, really tragic story. It's almost like a romance novel throughout a lot of it. The horror in it is quite minimal, but this is one of those ones that you don't need the horror to be in your face all the time, because it's actually really good and really genuine and really grasping the way that it is. The other thing is, before we cut it and move on, is the author's notes. Hey.
Yes.
Yeah, the author's notes. Jane Parkhurst herself, she talks about a lot of the characters, including Isabel Gowdy herself, her father, a lot of her associates in this story were actually living people in Scotland in the 1600s, and there are actually, what would you call it, accounts of these people living and doing what they do, which is also told in this story, which actually makes it a little bit more like gut-wrenching or a bit more heartbreaking.
Yeah, that it's real.
Yeah.
A bit real, possibly real.
You know, you got them horror movies. It's open
to speculation.
Yeah. You know, you get all the 101 movies based on real events. It's like, yeah, fuck off, you know. But this might be in the same basket as that. But just reading the author's notes at the end, after reading the story, how attached I became to this book, yeah. I don't know, it was a little bit damaging. Yeah.
Yes, I'd say it's a good book, and you'll want to keep reading it. But I can't say I was 100% satisfied at the end, and that's probably because it was quite real.
Yeah, fair enough. And for me, I'm very particular with endings. I like sad, heavy endings. What would you say on a horror meter and story meter for this one?
Oh, story meter 7. Horror meter, depends what horror. What you mean? If you mean fear horror, I think maybe only a 4.
Yeah.
But like horror, as in like witchcraft stuff you want to read, that's getting
even like the emotional
like
horror,
a 7.8. Oh yeah, emotional horror. Heck, that's like a 9.
Yeah, sick.
Wow.
There we go. That's what we want to hear. Yeah. Cool. I'd probably be on the same plane with you there. I might give the story meter like a good maybe 7.5, nearly an 8. Right. Anyways, we'll move on. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to leave this next couple of minutes completely up to Mr. Ramirez, because we started reading this book together. I got bored of it because I had great expectations of this writer, but I ducked out, and Miss Ramirez, she read the whole thing on her own, which is quite amazing. It's by a very prolific writer who I expected far more from in this specific story.
We've got Ramsey Campbell, The Hungry Moon.
Hey, Mr. Ramsey Campbell. He's done a lot of good stuff. Let's talk about The Hungry Moon.
The Hungry Moon. Well, in hindsight, I think it was quite good, but it just took too long to happen. You could tell what was going on, and it was very frustrating. The people in the town, this guy moves in, and you can see them moving towards being the most annoying cult. And yes, that's real horror. But like as far as things that were really creepy...
Aren't they like a Christian cult to begin with or something? You got like one of those fake Jesus motherfuckers or something?
Yes, but he's leading them astray. It's not a good thing. Sometimes religious people just want to do good. It wasn't good at all. And it was annoying. And you could see it happening for about 3/4 of the book. And only right at the end did creepy things and scary things happen. Ramsey Campbell has some really good ideas, really creepy ideas, really sections that were worded really well, and you just think, oh, like I would be totally freaked out if that happened. But it took such a long time to get there that Wolfcock was done. I was annoyed, and I just don't know how else to put it. Maybe if you can tolerate it, read through it. It was an interesting idea, and at the end, there was bits that were really worth reading. It just took so long to get there, and the situation that the main characters were experiencing was incredibly frustrating, which adds to your sort of angst as you read it.
That's right. Yeah. So, would you recommend the book?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, you would?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, like, horror meter, story meter, all that. Wrap it out there and we'll move on to our final book for the video. And then,
The story meter. It's losing points for long-windedness, but there was...
You got a point system. I like that.
Definitely, yeah. But perhaps I would give it a 6. There were certainly bits in there that were well thought out. And a horror meter, I don't know, like 80% of the book has a horror meter of maybe 3, and the other 20% has a horror meter of maybe 7. And there's just pockets there that you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then the rest, nah.
That's it, yeah.
Read the end. Read the
back. Here we go.
Read the back bit.
Read the back
bit.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. All right, let's go like this. Smash. All right, we got one more book for everybody, and this is Miss Ramirez's favorite book of all time. This is actually one of the first paperbacks that we ever read. Actually, no. This is the first paperback that we ever read together.
It was your first horror novel.
It was my first horror novel, probably a few years back now or something like that. And, Miss Ramirez would read this story to me to put me to bed all the time, and I'd just keep falling asleep, and she'd have to go over the end like 50 times.
I did read the end 3 times, and he fell asleep 3 times.
Yeah, and you love this book so much.
It was great.
All right, we got another one of the great writers of the underground. That's for anybody who happens to watch this video. I got through this far through the video. Anybody who gives a fuck and they're not fucking disappeared back onto Netflix, then we're going to talk about John Tigges' Book of the Dead. John Tigges, he's got I think it's called Garden of Incubus and Vessel and what else he got? Venom. Shit, he's got all sorts of stuff. He's another one of those writers out there. He's got a handful of good B-grade stuff. He's a really raunchy writer too. And so what can we remember from Book of the Dead? I remember we got Rob Lamott and his family and his father. It's quite segmented to begin with, and then it all intertwines together. What can you tell us about Book of the Dead from your memory?
Well, obviously, I'm afraid that Book of the Dead wasn't my favourite book.
Oh, you don't say.
It was. He had a good idea, but some of the way things sort of wrapped themselves up in the plot really felt like a bit of a cop out to me. Yeah, I just felt like it was kind of simple and a bit dull.
Very simple, a bit dull.
But look, that's my personal opinion. What about you, Wolfcock? Because you liked it more than me.
Well, I mean, I think I liked it because the thing that I will mention, or the little will mention about this story, without going into any great detail as usual, is that just about every character in this book, to one degree or another, is an asshole. And there's no real positive vibes in this book.
It was pretty bleak. Bad things were just happening to everyone.
Everybody's just shit, and nobody really makes the right choices or has the right morals or anything, which I reckon makes for a great story. And the ending I particularly liked eventually when I did hear it, when you read it to me for the 4th time or whatever it was.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about this book a great deal. It's just John Tigges. You can look him up, look up some of his stuff. If you come across this book, please get it. It's definitely worth a read. Yeah, I know you would say. You can shake your head.
I think that maybe give John Tigges a go, but not this book.
Yeah. Well, what else have I think I've got Venom back there. I've got a couple others, but we might get to those down at another stage.
Yeah.
Anyways, horror meter for you?
3.
3. Yeah, I'll give it like a 3 story.
I don't know. I can't remember it very well.
Maybe it just wasn't worth it. I'll give the story like a 5.
Yeah, I'll give it a 4 because it was a good idea. It just didn't. I don't know. Maybe you need to think on it a bit more. Maybe he was a bit tired, just pumping out another novel. Maybe it was one of the earlier ones. I actually don't know very much.
And it's just one of them pulp horror things where it should just be about like sex and negativity and people just being wankers and dying and shit.
Stuff getting set on fire and people dying.
Yeah, definitely. I do love the ending of this book.
Maybe that's why it's sort of horror.
All right, cool. Anyways, that's going to wrap us up. We'll be back again for anybody who cares, talking about more vintage paperbacks. And
there's many more to read.
There's a lot going on back there, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Slip Ramirez for being involved with us. And I hope that we'll read more books together in the future. And we'll see you around next time, fuckers.